Hello and welcome to Lost Love Mystery, where we explore the twists and turns of love, the pain of betrayal, and the mysteries that lie hidden in the heart. My name is William, and the echoes of a rather tumultuous chapter in my life still resonate with a peculiar blend of disbelief and, if I'm being honest, a certain satisfaction. It's a story that involves a whirlwind of emotions, a marriage that dissolved, and an unexpected twist of fate that ultimately left me reflecting on the unpredictable nature of relationships. It all began, or perhaps more accurately, it all shifted with the finalization of my divorce. The legal proceedings, the splitting of assets, the disentangling of two lives that had once been intertwined. It was a grueling process, a stark and often painful dissection of what had been. Just a mere week after the ink had dried on those fateful documents, my ex-wife, Evelyn, embarked on a new chapter of her own. She remarried. Yes, you heard that correctly. A week. It wasn't a quiet, understated affair, either. Evelyn, never one to shy away from the spotlight, proclaimed to anyone who would listen that she had, at long last, found her perfect husband. The narrative she spun was one of a woman who had finally discovered her soulmate, the missing piece to her puzzle, the man who understood her in ways I, apparently, never could. You would have thought she'd won the lottery. Such was the effusive nature of her pronouncements. Her words, in those early days of post-divorce separation, often reached my ears through the tangled web of mutual acquaintances. Each glowing adjective, each superlative description of this new paragon of virtue felt like a subtle barb, a pointed comparison to the man I had been, or, in her eyes, the man I had failed to be. There was a part of me, I confess, that bristled at this portrayal, this implication that our entire marriage had been a mere prelude to her true happiness. But beneath the surface irritation, a more profound sense of bewilderment began to take root. I couldn't quite reconcile the woman she was presenting to the world with the woman I thought I had known. The speed of her remarriage, the sheer exuberance of her pronouncements, it all felt theatrical, somehow. The real turning point, the moment when bewilderment gave way to a more complex and, yes, even humorous reaction, came later. It wasn't immediate. There was a period of weeks, a slow passage of time during which I focused on rebuilding my own life, on finding my footing in the aftermath of the divorce. I threw myself into my work, spent time with friends and family, and gradually began to piece together a sense of normalcy, a sense of self that had been somewhat obscured during the later, more turbulent years of my marriage. And then, fate, in its own inimitable way, intervened. It happened during a mundane errand, one of those routine tasks that form the unglamorous backdrop of daily life. I was at the local grocery store, navigating the crowded aisles, when I saw them. Evelyn and her perfect husband. Evelyn saw me first. I remember the way her smile faltered, the almost imperceptible tightening of her grip on the arm of the man beside her. And then, my eyes fell upon him. He was underwhelming. That's the only word that truly captures the essence of that first impression. He was a smallish man, with a somewhat disheveled appearance. His clothes seemed a size too large, his hair was a bit unkempt, and there was an air of uncertainty about him. He didn't exude the confidence or charisma that Evelyn had so lavishly attributed to him. He looked, to put it bluntly, like someone who might still be living in his mother's basement. And that's when I started to laugh. It wasn't a loud, boisterous guffaw, but a quiet, internal chuckle that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. It was a reaction born of sheer, unadulterated surprise, a sudden and complete deflation of the image that Evelyn had so carefully constructed. Here was the man for whom I had been deemed inadequate, the man who was supposedly my superior in every conceivable way. And he was this. I couldn't help it. The contrast between Evelyn's hyperbolic pronouncements and the reality of the situation was too stark, too absurd. It was as if the universe itself was playing a cosmic joke, revealing the grand illusion behind the curtain. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be tempted to dismiss my reaction as petty, as a childish display of spite. You might assume that I was simply being mean-spirited, gloating over my ex-wife's misfortune. But I assure you, it was more complex than that. To truly understand the depth of my reaction, you need to understand the context, the history that preceded that moment in the grocery store. You need to know the full story of my relationship with Evelyn, the slow unraveling of our marriage, and the emotional landscape that I traversed in its aftermath. So let's rewind. Let's go back to the beginning, to the moment when Evelyn first entered my life. I first met Evelyn during a weekend visit to my aunt's house. My aunt, Martha, had always been a warm and welcoming presence in my life, and I made it a point to visit her whenever my schedule allowed. She lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, a world away from the hustle and bustle of the city where I worked, and her home always felt like a sanctuary, a place of peace and respite. On this particular weekend, as it happened, Evelyn was also visiting my aunt. It turned out that they knew each other through their church group. It wasn't a deep, abiding friendship, the kind forged through years of shared experiences and mutual support. Rather, it was a more casual acquaintance, a connection based on shared faith and a sense of community. Evelyn would occasionally stop by to check in on my aunt, to lend a hand with household chores, or simply to offer a friendly face and a listening ear. I'll be candid with you. My initial impression of Evelyn was unremarkable, not in a negative sense, mind you. She was a pretty woman, with a pleasant demeanor and a warm smile. But there was nothing about her that immediately grabbed my attention, nothing that set her apart from the countless other people I encountered in my daily life. She didn't leave a lasting impression. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, the polite small talk that accompanies a first meeting. We talked about the weather, about my aunt's garden, about the church group. The conversation was cordial, but it lacked any real depth or spark. If you had asked me a week later to describe Evelyn, I doubt I could have provided you with any specific details. She was simply there. Life, however, has a funny way of orchestrating unexpected encounters. A few months later, I found myself visiting my aunt again. And, as fate would have it, Evelyn was there once more. This time, however, the circumstances were slightly different. Evelyn was actively engaged in helping my aunt with various tasks around the house. She was dusting furniture, sweeping the floors, and preparing a simple lunch in the kitchen. She was no longer a passive presence, but an active participant in the rhythm of the household. As a result, our interaction was more sustained, more meaningful. We talked as she worked, our conversation flowing with an ease that had been absent during our first encounter. We discovered shared interests, a similar sense of humor, and a mutual appreciation for my aunt's quirky stories. I found myself drawn to her quiet competence, her willingness to lend a hand, and the genuine warmth that radiated from her. I remember being struck by her laugh. It was a bright, melodic sound that filled the room, a sound that seemed to chase away the shadows and bring a sense of lightness to the atmosphere. I found myself wanting to make her laugh, to elicit that sound again and again. Before I knew it, hours had passed. The afternoon sun was beginning to slant through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Evelyn glanced at her watch and announced that she had to leave. As she gathered her things, my aunt, ever the observant and well-meaning matchmaker, nudged me gently and whispered, "You better not let that one get away." I laughed, dismissing her comment as playful teasing. But even as I chuckled, a small part of me wondered if there might be a grain of truth in her words. Evelyn, for her part, seemed oblivious to my aunt's machinations. As she reached the door, she turned to me with a casual smile and said, "Hey, let's stay in touch." She pulled out her phone, we exchanged numbers, and then she was gone. My aunt, of course, seized upon this exchange as further evidence of Evelyn's interest. She regaled me with stories of Evelyn's kindness, her generosity, and her unwavering faith. She made a series of increasingly elaborate jokes about how I was already hooked, how I wouldn't be able to resist her charms, how I would soon be a regular fixture at her church. I laughed it all off, attributing her comments to her natural tendency towards exaggeration and her fondness for all things romantic. But deep down, I knew that something had shifted. The seed of a connection had been planted, and I couldn't deny that I was intrigued. In the days and weeks that followed, Evelyn and I began to communicate regularly. We texted throughout the day, sharing snippets of our lives, our thoughts, and our dreams. We talked on the phone late into the night, our conversations stretching for hours, covering everything from our favorite movies to our deepest fears. I was struck by her attentiveness. She seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say, even the most mundane details of my day. She asked thoughtful questions, offered insightful observations, and always made me feel heard and valued. One thing that was important to me, from the very beginning, was to establish the nature of her relationship status. I didn't want to find myself in a situation where I was pursuing someone who was already involved with someone else. Fortunately, my aunt, with her extensive network of church acquaintances, had already confirmed that Evelyn was indeed single. This knowledge gave me the confidence to relax and simply enjoy getting to know her, to see where our connection might lead. After several weeks of increasingly frequent and intimate conversations, I finally mustered the courage to ask Evelyn out on a proper date. I remember the flutter of nerves in my stomach as I dialed her number, the slight tremor in my voice as I spoke the words. She smiled when I asked, her eyes sparkling with a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. She said yes, and we set up our first date for the following weekend. That first date was magical. We went to a small, intimate restaurant with soft lighting and candlelit tables. The conversation flowed effortlessly, punctuated by shared laughter and moments of comfortable silence. We discovered a mutual love for classic literature, a shared passion for hiking, and a surprising number of overlapping experiences. By the end of the evening, I knew that I was falling for her. There was a connection between us, a sense of rightness, that I had never experienced before. The dating phase of our relationship was, in a word, easy. We spent countless hours together, exploring the city, attending concerts, and simply enjoying each other's company. We talked about our hopes for the future, our fears, and our dreams. We built a foundation of trust, respect, and mutual admiration. We dated for several years before we even broached the subject of marriage. We were both cautious, perhaps even a bit wary, of rushing into anything too quickly. We had seen too many couples succumb to the pressures of societal expectations, only to find themselves unhappy and disillusioned a few years down the road. We wanted to be sure. We wanted to know each other inside and out, to understand each other's quirks and foibles, to build a relationship that could withstand the inevitable challenges of life. We believed that taking our time, building a strong foundation of friendship and companionship, would ultimately lead to a more fulfilling and lasting marriage. Eventually, after years of dating, we both came to the realization that we were ready. We had found in each other a partner, a confidant, and a best friend. We were ready to commit our lives to each other, to build a future together, to face whatever joys and sorrows life might bring. We got married with a profound sense of optimism, a belief that we had done everything right. We had taken the slow path, believing that it would guarantee the success of our marriage. We had invested time, energy, and emotional intimacy into building a relationship that we believed was unbreakable. But, as I was to learn, life doesn't always unfold according to our carefully laid plans. Sometimes, despite our best intentions, things fall apart. Sometimes, the very things we believe will save us are the things that ultimately lead to our undoing.